Ooh, this is Chuck, and welcome to the How to Defeat Dudes video blog. Now, the weather's finally starting to get nice here in Tokyo, so I really wanted to do something outside for you guys in a really kind of Tokyo-y type place, like at a park or in front of a shrine or something like that, but unfortunately the weather was just not cooperating with me today. A little bit too windy, so here I am instead talking to you from the inside of my glorious Tokyo apartment. Hope you guys don't mind. So one of the things that people have been asking me about a lot lately is how to go about the process of finding yourself a good martial arts school. So that's what I want to deal with for today's blog, how to find yourself a school. Basically, I think there's 5 factors that you need to consider, and for this blog we're going to be dealing with each of those 5 factors in turn. It's kind of funny because this is like my right hand on the right side, but then on camera it turns out to be like on the other side. It's kind of cool. Now, I'm not going to list these factors in any particular order of importance because for some people, some things are going to be more important than for others. So it's kind of up to you which one is more important and which one is less important. Factor number 1, logistics of getting there. You could find the most amazing martial arts school on earth with like ninjas jumping off of the wall everywhere, and they can teach you how to meditate and shoot stuff out of your eyes in like less than a day and all that. But the fact of the matter is, if it's so far away that you need to climb over a mountain with dogs chasing you both ways, you're probably not going to go very often, which means you're probably not going to get very much out of it, and you're probably not going to end up being very good at it. So any martial arts school you're looking at, it needs to be close enough to where you live or close enough to where you work that it's easy for you to get back and forth. I mean, it doesn't exactly have to be like in your living room or next door or even down the street, but it's got to be logistically feasible for you to get there regularly without too much stress. Or else, no matter how much you love it, chances are after a while you're just going to get tired of it, you're going to get tired of the commute, and then you're just going to kind of fall off and not get there very often. So, remember, it needs to be within a feasible distance of your home. That's factor number 1. Okay, so factor number 2 to consider is program costs. Again, you could find like the most incredible martial arts instructor ever, maybe like some homeboy with like a really long beard and incredibly huge eyebrows and like this whole get up and all that. But the fact of the matter is, if it costs you your rent and your firstborn child and your left arm in order to be able to pay the tuition to go there, it's probably not worth your time. One thing to remember is that also just because a school might be super, super reputable, or a particular instructor might have an incredible competition record or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a good teacher. Especially because those kinds of schools where you have a teacher that's got this super, super incredible reputation, oftentimes he doesn't really teach anymore. Most of his students teach, and they may or may not be very good. So, or they may or may not have the same kind of experience that he's had. So, I know, at least in my experience, some of the best martial arts teachers I've ever found haven't necessarily been, the guys that are super, super famous. It was just the guy who just happened to be around the street from me, but he was just very, very good at what he did and very, very good at teaching and didn't necessarily care about having a huge school. So, when you're looking for schools, make sure that you get a chance to get a good look at it. Make sure that it's worth your time, but not so much that it's going to kill you to go there. So another factor that's really important that you need to think about when you're looking at what school you want to train at is the particular school's atmosphere. Different kind of martial arts schools can have really, really different atmospheres. And, an atmosphere that works for one person may not necessarily work for another. So if you're a really kind of competitive person and you like having rivals and you like being pushed in that way, then that's the kind of thing that you should look for in a school. Whereas if you just want a place that you can go, you can kind of casually learn and stay relaxed and just make good friends and just enjoy the environment as you're training and improving, then a kind of a family dojo place might be a much better, it might suit you much better. So that's another factor that you need to think about, is the atmosphere of the school itself. And you could usually get kind of a feel for that, within seeing if you watch a class or two, or, sometimes if you visit and you do the trial lessons or whatnot. Okay? Well, in continuing this discussion of kind of the importance of looking at a school's atmosphere when trying to find a school that suits you, logically the next thing that you need to consider is the actual teaching style of the teacher there. Now, this can vary hugely from school to school, even within styles. And some guys will just want to push you really, really, really hard, and some guys will just be really, really, really mellow. I shouldn't even say guys, some teachers, some female teachers as well, could be either way, right? So you need to find the one that seems to suit you the best. Now, if you look at the whole life cycle of the martial artist, quote unquote, the younger masters, the ones who are in their kind of late 20s to maybe early 30s, tend to be much more strict. Kind of like how young parents are usually the most strict with their firstborn child, just because they want to do everything right. So they're really strict about things, generally speaking. Whereas if you contrast that with an older master, probably like a grandmaster or at least somebody who's over 50, like these guys tend to be really chill, maybe even a little bit too much, kind of like your grandparents. Depending on what exactly you're looking for, I think either one of these can work out really well for you, actually. It just depends. Now, for me personally, I think that martial arts masters are generally at their best right around kind of late 30s or maybe early 40s, just because at that point they still haven't lost anything physically. They're still really strong. They've still got all the techniques and everything, and at the same time they've still got like a little bit of that strictness, but they're also much more settled into their teaching method, and they've got some sense of how to work with students usually. Last of this list, but absolutely not least, is the style. Nowadays, pretty much everybody uses the term martial art to mean anything that involves any kind of punching, kicking, or combat. But depending on what exactly your needs are, there's actually 3 different categories that you need to consider. There's combat sports, there's fighting styles, and then there's actually martial arts. And we'll take a look at each one in turn. Combat sports. Okay, so combat sports include things like boxing, MMA, sport taekwondo, sport jiu-jitsu, and things like that. Okay. Now the great thing about combat sports is that you can learn an incredible amount about the actual nature of fighting. You can learn things like distancing and timing, how to take and how to give hits, how to read people, how to bait and trap, and all these things that go into actually fighting people that are really important. In particular, building up reaction time. And that's huge for self-defense. Now, the bad side of the downfall of combat sports is that because there's rule systems involved, there's a certain kind of artificiality that goes along with them as well. For example, combat sports, with the possible exception of a 2-on-1 fighting system called Sando that was happening in Japan for a little while, are generally always 1-on-1. And the fact of the matter is, in real life or in street situations, self-defense isn't always necessarily 1-on-1, at least not in the hood. The other thing to keep in mind as well is that, self-defense can involve all kinds of weapons. So both for you and for them. Me personally, I'm not going to try and punch a kicker dude if I can just grab something and break it over his head, right? That's something that can happen very seriously in any kind of a self-defense situation that isn't going to happen in a contact sport. So you're never even, you watch amazing fighters in the UFC, nobody ever pulls out a knife. Or nobody grabs a chair and breaks it over anybody's head. Well, maybe in pro wrestling that happens a lot. But pro wrestling aside, weapons generally never enter ring sports. So that's kind of the downfall of combat sports. Fighting systems. Okay, so fighting systems are things like the KC fighting method or Systema, or at least from what I've seen and experienced training in a little bit, Krav Maga. These are things that are made purely and exclusively for training you on how to defend yourself on the street, and that's great. And then when you're training in them, you can cover a ton of different scenarios. Really good stuff. Now, the downside of pure fighting systems is that because you're not engaging as many opponents as you would when you're doing combat sports, 1, you may not get the same level of reaction time buildup. And 2, which I think is just as important, if not more so, is you may not necessarily get as much experience learning how to take hits and recover. And that in and of itself is huge for being able to defend yourself. Number 3, martial arts. Now, what makes a martial art distinct from a combat sport or from a pure fighting system is that there's a strong emphasis on the development of discipline and on the development of creating a better member of society. Okay. Now, me personally, I did happen to come from a sport fighting background originally, but I very much consider myself to be a martial arts instructor. So for me, what that means is that my job isn't to teach people how to fight, it's to teach them about themselves through fighting. Meaning to teach them the things that they're naturally good at and the things that they may need to work on. The things that they should be proud of about themselves and the things that they can have confidence in and the areas that they need to improve. And the fact that they just happen to learn how to fight really well along the way is just a byproduct of the training. When you walk into a martial arts school, you're going to see little kids saying yes sir and no sir, and when you watch kind of like rank tests or things like that, then the teachers are going to be just as interested as to how things are improving in their students' personal lives as how they are improving in terms of their techniques. Because for the martial artist or for the martial arts instructor, that kind of thing is just as important. Keep in mind that these categories don't exactly have to be mutually exclusive. There's a lot of martial arts schools where you can get a lot of really serious self-defense training, or where you can get a lot of a kind of sport fighting experience as well. As I mentioned before, I came from a sport fighting background for most of my martial arts career. You know, my original teacher back in the States was an 80 Olympic trials finalist, National Collegiate Coach of the Year, so he had a very strong sport fighting background. So when I wanted to go in that direction, he kind of helped me along in my way. Because he was a martial artist first, and he still is a martial artist first, you know, for him instilling discipline in his students was much more important. So it was because of that martial arts training that I went from being a C- average student in my sophomore year in high school to having all A's when I graduated and having never smoked, drank, or done any kind of drugs or anything. That was purely because of the discipline that I got from coming from a serious martial arts background. So anyway, I hope that my making this video can help you guys to find the martial arts school that suits you the best. Beyond everything that I've told you, the best advice that I have to give is to go to a school that feels right for you. You're going to have a lot of friends, if you talk to them, that are going to say, you know, you should do this style and you should do that style. But what works for your friends, you know, may not necessarily work for you. Nowadays, MMA and kind of jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai kickboxing is just huge in terms of popularity. But for me, if I actually had to start off in those styles, I may not have ended up sticking with them. Just because, for one, to be honest, I really don't like getting punched in the face. I'm just not a fan. Even though, I mean, I think it's really important to know how to take those hits and how to recover from it and all that other, but I kind of just don't like it. Okay. Two, I'm not necessarily a fan of being on the ground either. You know, again, I think it's really important. I think you should know how, but at the same time, it's just kind of not my thing. What I really like is I like being on my feet and I like kicking. I think kicking is fun. I think kicking targets is fun. I like doing spin kicks, all this kind of stuff. And the fact that that was what was most fun for me is what allowed me to stick with Taekwondo for the 20 years that it took me to get my master's rank. The other thing to keep in mind too is that absolutely no martial art is perfect. Now, if you got a friend that's training in something, they're probably going to spend a lot of time telling you about how their style is so incredibly, vastly superior to every other kind of fighting style, but none of them are perfect. Okay, they've all got faults. I mean, for example, if you look at the human body has how many millions of years of evolution behind it. Even so, it's only about 70% efficient. I mean, we lose a ton of energy through just plain and simple heat loss. And that's after millions of years of evolution, right? So for myself, the idea that absolutely anything man-made could achieve this kind of incredible level of perfection is just kind of a fallacy of thinking. Any martial art and every martial art is riddled with imperfections. So the best thing that you can do is just find one that you really like, find one that you really enjoy at a place that you like and that you can get to and that you can afford. Just do that, love it, enjoy it, then kind of cross-train to figure out what the imperfections are, and then just work around the imperfections of your system. That's the best thing that I think you can do, or the best way that I think you can go. Sorry about the Skype noise. I think that might have been my mom's. So anyways, guys, you could probably tell from the lighting, it's starting to get dark outside pretty soon. All you're going to be seeing is my teeth. So I'm going to just go ahead and just stop here. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that this video helps you out. I hope that you guys can find the school that you're looking for. And in the meantime, just go ahead and keep checking out the videos, and I'm just going to keep posting. Okay? So this is Chuck. Good luck, and see you next time. Yosh!